You asked about my reaction to him during the trial.
Yes.
One other reaction I had was that I felt he kind of just wanted to get it over with. At one point, during his cross-examination, I felt, okay, I'm going down. Let's just get this over with. And he kind of, let his facade drop somewhat.
You better be watching. You better be watching in the dark. You better be watching.
Mr. Pearson invited me into the house, and I thought for a second, knowing what I know now, I could have been the fourth bag under the house.
I was the main witness. I had to tell them about everything that I found and that I felt that they were under the house. And stared me down, and I just looked right back at him.
I'm Sonya Paz.
And I'm Mark Kospchik.
And we are your host of Investigated.
This podcast describes scenes of true crime details and may not be suitable for all listeners. Please be advised.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to episode 6 of Investigated. And boy, oh boy, do we have a lot of things for you today. We're probably going to run overtime, but that is okay because the details are great. And I have my co-host, Mark, here today. How's it going?
Hi, Sonya. How are you?
Good. Yeah, we've got a full plate today, don't you think?
Yeah, we do. So I think we should get started. I do know that we have a listener question.
We do. We did get a request. So Crystal from San Jose asks a question that is amazing, which nobody has asked this yet. And that is, Sonya, did you or your parents go to this trial? And the answer for me, I myself didn't attend because I was in school. However, I wish my dad was still here. Well, for numerous reasons, but I wish that I could ask him if he might have attended. He is somebody that probably would have gone. I don't think that he would have told my mom, though, because she would have been a little bit worried about things. I'm not sure why. It's not like the guy could get out. It's not like Pearson was able to come over and say, why did you tell them about my bad behavior when I golfed with you? But I don't know if my dad had attended, but I know that if he did, he would have told me. So great. But
great question.
It is a great question. And I think that what we're going to learn today is a lot of things. We kind of got Mark, who's going to just go over a short bit of timeline. And if anybody else is out there that wants to ask a question about anything with this case, feel free to reach out on our website at investigatedpod.com. You can go to our contact page and we will get your request or a lead, or if you knew the family or whatever. At the time of this episode airing, which would be March 21st, 2024, this past weekend on March 15th would have been 50 years from the date that the Pearson ladies were found under the house on Claremont in Santa Clara. I definitely want to acknowledge that. The reason that date is not only important to other dates that are relevant is that is the date that the coroner uses for their date of death. I know that Marianne would have been about 68 years old this year, and Paula would have been roughly about 72 years this year. I do feel that if Marianne was alive today, we would have definitely kept in touch with each other our whole lives. And I'm pretty sure she probably would have been on Facebook, so we would be connected as friends on Facebook as well. I just want to make sure that I acknowledge them because this is a significant date. So, yeah, think about them in your thoughts today. One little tidbit I want everyone to understand, too, is that I've taken a chunk of information of this case, and Mark has taken a chunk of this information of the case. And so we have been working together and intertwining all of our knowledge of the case together to give you a concise chronological format. He's read a lot of what I have been researching. I have read a lot of the case file. But after a while, things kind of start melding in together. So my amazement at some of the things that he has brought to our attention and has read from the case file, I might exclaim as being really surprised. And that is because hearing it from some other view or hearing it from his voice versus reading it takes on a whole different feeling for me. So I just want to explain that just in case somebody was going, why is she sounding so surprised at all this information? And that is why. It's such a data dump and it's just so crazy that it's really refreshing to hear it told in another person's voice. So there you go. I'm going to talk to you about my interview with George Kennedy, who was the former district attorney of Santa Clara County. He and I spoke a few days ago, and he gave me a great interview over the phone. I'll go through all of the details of that, which I really enjoyed talking to him. He is a man of few words, but boy, oh boy, he had given me so much amazing information. And then we're going to just move into the recorded interview that I had with Detective Sergeant Monte Macer from the Santa Clara Police Department. He and I had met about a month ago and got a great interview with him. He was on the front and the back end of this investigation to apprehend James Arthur Pearson. So
That's
Mark,
a lot of stuff to cover, huh?
we got a full plate today, but I know our listeners love our episodes. We are gaining more followers every week. There's a lot of excitement. People are texting me, telling me, OMG, I can't believe this and I can't believe that. And why is this only once a week? And the answer for that is because it takes 5 days to edit and go through everything. I don't know if I should tell everyone that, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work behind the scenes.
Yes. And you have a real job and I have a real job. So it just once a week is great because it gives us the opportunity to really make sure that all of our details are in check and that we're ready to rock and roll.
Well, and it gives people to ask questions, and also as they listen, they may not have questions, but I know that they contact you, and we've had people giving us more information as we proceed. So we can always plug those little snippets into our episodes as they come around.
Absolutely. I also wanted to give a huge shout out to Robert Howe with the Santa Clara Online News. He had responded to the press release that we had sent out, and he gave us a really great write-up on his online news that he produces every week. And we got some great coverage on there and some more listeners. So always appreciative of that and really applaud his efforts into keeping us in the Santa Clara News. And thank you so much to Robert. So awesome.
Cool.
So tell us what we had gone over last week about the pretrial, and that was very technical. I did get one comment that said it wasn't too logistically legal infused, that it was easy to follow.
Well, and I appreciate that. That's what I want to do. I want to boil it down, just kind of go through what trials are like and how it goes to get them ready and that sort of thing. So last week we did go through the prelim, and we talked about who testified at the prelim. And what I want everybody to remember is the prelim is kind of a mini trial. And so it's about the district attorney putting on their case for the judge to see if there's enough evidence to go forward in trial. I would say 99% of the time, the defendant, or in this case Pearson, would not have testified at the prelim at all. What it is it's a defense team's way to find out how much evidence the DA has and what evidence the DA is going to present to the judge to get this thing kicked over to trial. It's more of a fishing expedition for the defense team, and that's basically how that prelim went. The DA put on just enough evidence to have the judge hold Pearson over for trial, and then, within weeks went to trial. So as you remember, FBI agent O'Neill had that conversation with Pearson from Biloxi to Gulfport, where he was then transferred to Detective Sergeant Macer's custody to be brought back to Santa Clara. There was that conversation. He obviously didn't testify at the prelim, But what he did testify to in trial, and this comes from the appeal that his public defender did and also the rebuttal for the appeal that the DA did. So that's where this trial information comes from. We haven't been able to get the trial transcripts for Pearson's case. Logistically, it's been kind of a nightmare to do, but we've gotten a lot of information from what Sonya has discovered from the appeals portion of his documents. So basically what happened was Pearson's biggest thing that he wanted to put forward to the jury and to the judge was that he had no intention to kill Paula when he strangled her, and that when he killed Marianne and Pauline, he finally did admit on the stand that he did do that out of anger. But what he told the court and the jury was that after he killed Marianne and Pauline, he was in the state of shock. And there was a quote that was listed in the appeals document that said, he really was in the state of shock, end quote. He said he went crazy when Marianne and Pauline came into the house because everyone started screaming at him. And up until then, he had no intent to kill them, but obviously then took the meat hammer and took a whack at both of them and killed them pretty much instantaneously. He was asked on the stand if there was any intention of him trying to get his mother-in-law's property, and he stated no to the jury and to the judge, which is interesting in itself because he did invite his mother-in-law to stay, and then when she gave legal rights to her son, he pretty much packed her up, as we remember, and put her on a plane back home.
Correct. With no money, no plane ticket, and just dropped her off and just left her there. Nice guy.
And then ended up having to have her family pay for the airplane ticket back.
Right.
The other thing he testified to was that Paula, as you remember, was getting ready to go to college, and she wanted to go to a Cal State college because she was such a good student in high school. And he actually testified to that he had a conversation with Paula and that she didn't want to go to a Cal State school, but that she wanted to stick around home and get an apartment so that when Marianne graduated from high school, she could move in together with Paula and they could have an apartment together. He testified to that because that was the root of the argument that took place before she was killed, that he came into the room, saw them rolling the marijuana cigarettes, and lost it when she told him he was pretty much a good for nothing and couldn't find a job.
So the daughter not going to college and getting an apartment, that would have enraged him based on what we know. He didn't have a job, and she's calling him to the carpet by calling him a loser who can't get a job. And this anger probably just started up at the feet and just worked its way from 0 to 60 up to his head, where it exploded pretty much, I guess.
Right. And I think what happened was because he was off of work for 2 or 3 months, and him being the con artist that he ended up being, I think he was beside himself. And then that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Right.
The other thing that was brought up in trial by the district attorney, and it was objected to up and down, it sounds like, because both DA and defense attorney legally argued this point in their appeals. And that was the DA asked Pearson about rumors of him having an affair. And I think that opened up a lot of jurors' eyes when that question was answered. But Pearson vehemently denies having an affair. That's what he testified to.
Right.
He also said when he was pressed about the killings of Marianne and Pauline, that he was sorry for killing them, but really showed no remorse. And that was listed in the appeal by the DA, that remorse for Pearson was never really a good cause for him, I don't think. He apologized, but never really showed remorse for anything.
Yes, that's accurate, because when I play the interview that I had with George Kennedy, we do touch on that whole remorse thing, and he really explains his point of view on that matter.
There's no mention about his mental illness defense in any of the documentation in the appeal or during the prelim at all. And so what I'm thinking is they evaluated him and he did not come back meeting the qualifications for not guilty by reason of insanity. So they threw that out the window, and they basically had the arguments that the first murder was not intention and that the second and third murders were not premeditated. But the jury didn't believe that, and they found him guilty.
Guilty as charged.
So the actual trial started on December 4th, 1978, with a myriad of pretrial motions and that sort of thing. The judge polled jurors, and the jurors were sworn on December 8th, 1978. There were 6 men and 6 women jurors, with 2 alternates who were 2 men. The trial actually started on December 11th, 1978, and there were several motions on exhibits. There were actually phone calls from the jail around November 11th, 1978, by 3 people that spoke with Pearson, and the DA wanted to use those phone calls to show Pearson admitting to the murders. So there were admissions that they were going to be using in those motions during trial, which they ended up using.
Do we know who those phone calls were to or from?
Belinda Brattle and Betty Christensen. Detective Sergeant Macer was the first person who actually testified during the first day. He, I believe, testified to setting up the facts, how he was notified by the FBI, how he went to Biloxi, transported Pearson back, any conversations of that sort. And then the next person who testified was the coroner, Dr. Hauser. That's where he went through some of the exhibits that were entered into the trial. So he testified to dental records from Oregon, to the photographs of the bodies that were found under the house. So that would have been photographs under the house, and then when they took the bodies out, and then also at the coroner's office when they did their examination of the skeletal remains. He did a chart of where the bodies were located underneath the house, and he testified to that. The next witness that testified was Leroy Akins, and he was Pauline's boss, and he testified to payroll checks, time cards, and a 1969 calendar. And I think he testified to that because he wanted the jury to know when Pauline left for lunch and then when Pearson came the next day, and what those dates were in relation to when Pearson left. The next witness that testified was Mary Wingate, and you know what she testified to based on her interview with us earlier in the podcast. And she testified to not only what she told us to, but I didn't quite remember if she had testified to a diagram of the house. And so that was brought up in the appeal, that she was one of the people that testified to a diagram of where the 2 crawl spaces were in the house. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Her husband, Michael Wingate, also testified to fixing Pearson's car and also put into evidence his repair booklet that he wrote down what repairs were done and how much it cost and when that was done.
Wow, pretty impressive. With the calendar from Leroy and Mr. Wingate's receipt book or his repair book, I mean, hey, gotta give him credit for keeping organized, right?
Right. Then there were two witnesses that I'm not familiar with, and I didn't see what they testified to, but they were Peter Thomas Clylo and Kenneth Frazier. After they testified, Detective Sergeant Macer then testified to all the photographs of the house. So that would have been inside, outside, and any other details of evidence that they found at that point, minus the bodies, which is what Dr. Hauser took photographs of. So that concluded the first day. The next day, December 12th, 1978, Harry Burns testified. Harry Burns was the other detective in this case. He, along with Detective Sergeant Macer, testified again. Then Arlene Roosh testified, and we all know that she was one of Pearson's ex-wives. Then Leroy Akins testified again. And then the last person testifying on the 12th was Agent O'Neill, who was the FBI agent that brought Pearson in to custody.
You know, just hearing this timeline of everything that happened the first day and the second day and all that, those were pretty jam-packed days. They covered a lot of information in this.
Right. And those were basically all the witnesses for the district attorney. On the last day of trial, on December 18th, 1978, prosecution called rebuttal witnesses who would testify to anything that Pearson had testified to and want to refute his testimony. So those people were Sergeant Detective Macer was recalled, Leroy Ikenis, Belinda Brattle, and Betty Christensen. Now, Leroy was probably recalled for some kind of date issues or when Pearson picked up her paycheck. Belinda and Betty were probably recalled for the telephone conversation that they had with Pearson a month before trial. And there was probably something there where Pearson testified to those phone calls, but they probably weren't accurate, and they wanted to get Belinda and Betty's testimony in on that.
I would really love to see what those transcripts said, because to what capacity were this Belinda and Betty involved with Pearson in this trial, and what was said on those phone calls? I would love to know that.
Right. And it was obviously important to the DA to call them as rebuttal witnesses, because whatever Pearson testified to must not have been accurate, and the DA wanted those two's testimonies on the record for the jury. He made the phone calls from jail to these people. Yeah, there were 3 telephone calls made on 11/11, and those are the 2 that he spoke with. They must have been something to do with Pearson's admonition to what happened, because they wouldn't have used those women for any other reason, especially for rebuttal witnesses after he testified. So on December 18th, they had 4 rebuttal witnesses, and then after that, both defense and prosecution rested. The judge on the case on December 19th read jury instructions and sent the jury out to deliberate. My feeling was that he did jury instructions in the morning and sent them out for the rest of the afternoon, and then they actually came back on December 20th, late in the day, and had a verdict. So they were only out a day and a half, and they found Pearson guilty of what he was charged with.
And there you have it. Justice was served.
Here's a little tidbit for you, Sonya. So in your records that you were able to pull, it's very, very interesting, because this does not happen this day and age. There's a full list of all the jurors with their names and addresses in the court minutes and in the file. Boy, if that happened this day and age, we'd be in a lot of trouble. But it is very interesting that they did list that information back then in 1974.
Yeah. Wow. I wonder when that changed, or what law was passed to get that, is that just California, or is that all over?
No, I think it's all over. I'm trying to remember when I first started doing investigation in 84, it was that way then. The jurors' information was kept secret from the public, and the judge and the court wouldn't release that information. And how much they got paid that day.
Yeah, were they raking it in for this case?
Well, I'm thinking, anywhere from $50 to $120, depending on where they were coming from.
For the whole day or for the whole time that they were?
For the day.
Not bad in that day and age, huh?
I guess not.
Wow. Wowee.
So the other interesting, and I know I always say interesting because this is actually interesting, is the way Pearson came across to the jury from my reading of the documentation is that he had a set fact pattern that he wanted to follow based on, I think, the defense team's way of setting up the case, since they weren't able to use any of the psych stuff that they wanted to, was a far cry of what he wrote in his Garden of Eden letter. And it seemed like between when trial finished, when he was found guilty, when he wrote this letter, which was about a month, because sentencing was January 25th, 1979.
Right.
Usually what the defense team wants from their client is a remorseful letter after they've been found guilty, stating that they're so sorry they did this, it was on them, yada, yada, yada. That was not the case with Pearson at all, because obviously we read that letter to everyone, and it just didn't come across that to me. There was zero remorse. I think the only remorse there was for him giving up his freaking Garden of Eden, and that was selfish. It had nothing to do with Pauline, Marianne, or Paula.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing that I got from the whole letter/report was that he's so passionate about the pecan trees and the gumball bushes and the raspberries and the popcorn and all that other stuff that he didn't have any kind of passion or statements of gratitude of a family that he had, of the other two families, the Pearson women and of course the Roosh family, or even his Watson family for that matter. I mean, he talks about all of the stuff and how it made him feel, but I didn't get a sense of anything remotely compassionate about, him,
his family,
and lamenting over all of this stuff.
Right. And so you totally hit the nail on the head. And that is, he has three families where he spent chunks of his life until he was 54 with these families that he organized, was with, and there's no mention of them in that letter at all.
Right. He doesn't even mention about how much he loved his one and only son. I mean, he doesn't even talk about that.
Right. Exactly. I was going to bring that up too. None of the people in his lives he mentions. And again, that's what the judge is looking for when someone writes a letter to the court stating their position and what they want the judge to know about how they could maybe be rehabilitated. And it was obvious to me that that letter wasn't going to get him anywhere. The judge had to read it because it was part of the pre-sentence report that they do, but he put zero weight into that letter and obviously gave Pearson his life sentences, and Pearson ended up dying in jail. And
good. Oh, sorry. Did I say that too fast?
Maybe. No, but he was up for parole many times and was denied. And so I think it's the lack of remorse that made him stay in jail and die in prison.
Right. Absolutely. And you'll hear from my interview with Monte Macer that when he had learned that there were parole hearings coming up, he wrote letters and he was really on the scene because he did not want Pearson to be getting out on his watch or anybody's watch for that matter, because he knew what kind of a diabolical person, and that at any point he would have jumped parole in a heartbeat and gone off and reinvented himself to be somebody else.
Right. So it will be interesting to listen to Detective Sergeant Macer's conversation with you and also the DA after we've gone through this tidbit of trial information.
Yep. Well, that was awesome. I mean, everyone has to understand that, the case file itself was 326 pages long. It's a lot of things to read, and it was bulk scanned, which means that, back when they scanned all this stuff, 20 years ago or whatever, is that they're just taking a pile of papers and they're just running it through a scanner. It's not done in any specific type of format. Some dates were mixed in with other dates that didn't seem to be chronological. And so it was a little frustrating to kind of go through that. But gosh, you did it. We did it. And yeah, it was just a great breakdown of everything that happened during that trial.
And I hope that everybody could follow it and that everybody gets some information from it.
Yep. With that said, I did reach out and I have spoken to George Kennedy. As I mentioned, he is the former district attorney of Santa Clara County who tried the case on the prosecution side. There might be a couple of things that I mentioned in our interview that might have been mentioned earlier in a different episode, or maybe some things that Mark has talked about. I just had some key questions because I do want to respect the time of people that we are talking to that are taking time in their busy life to share with us. One of the things that he asked me, what was my involvement in the case and what was my interest to do this? And I explained everything to him. He kind of paused for a moment and then he said, wow, well, if you're going to be talking and documenting this case, this is a good one. And he wasn't kidding. So without any further ado, here is my interview with George Kennedy. Thank you so much, George. I truly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
As I had mentioned to you, I was doing this story on James Arthur Pearson and that I was friends of the daughters. And for years, I had wondered whatever happened with the story and picked it up, put it down, and things like that. And as of late last year, November, I thought that I wanted to find out. And it turned into a full-on investigation on my end of putting all the pieces together and finding family members and retired law enforcement like Monte and Wayne Britt and have interviewed them. And of course, I found your name in the documents and the trial. I went to the county and got the case file and everything. But of course, there's a lot of little missing pieces and just wanted to touch base with you about just some things about the trial. So obviously, you were involved with the case because it was assigned to you in 1978. The trial only lasted 6 days for a triple murder. Do you remember the circumstances on how that window was so short?
No, I don't remember it being short, frankly. I'm sure it was if you've checked the record, but
yeah, I mean,
I don't remember it as being an unusually short time frame.
Maybe compared to now where it could take, 2+ years.
Because he was apprehended in June of 1978 and his trial started in November. So it was about 5 months later. Was that normal during that time?
No. It's generally just a function of whether or not the defendant waived time or not. If they waived their right to a speedy trial, judges would usually put the case off quite a ways. Okay. If they demanded their right to a speedy trial, then of course they are statutorily entitled to have a quick trial, and that's the way it happened usually.
Okay.
And that was usually a function of the defense attorney's strategy. If he thought, witnesses would disappear or something like that, he or she wouldn't waive time. If they thought that, delay would benefit them, like witnesses forgetting or disappearing, then they would waive time.
Okay.
The courts were so crowded back then that any opportunity to put the case off was seized by the court. as a general statement.
Okay.
I don't remember if he waived time or not. Also, it might have been an issue of the jail having trouble holding him, or his being a nuisance in one way or another, security costs or, things like that might have caused the sheriff to urge the court to get the trial going and over with.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I mean, that's just a possibility. I don't recall. And also, one or more of the attorneys involved in the case may have had a bunch of other cases that were backing the courts up, and the court might have wanted to get this one out of the way or something. I'm just speculating on why it looked like a quick time frame.
Okay. I don't have the transcript, but I do have the court, all the court documents, 326 pages. Of course, those have witness testimonies and, of course, all of the proceedings of the court, but there was no evidence or anything like that included in that. Is that typically separate from that? Do you know?
So, is the physical evidence separate from the court transcript?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And does the county or does the court system typically keep all that for a long time?
The court keeps it for a long time. In a serious case like this, they'll keep it almost forever.
Okay.
And, so often things are much later tested for DNA and other technologies that are developed. They like to keep the physical evidence unmolested in a safe in the courthouse.
Okay. Do you know if there was any sort of psychological or psych defense that was brought up during the defense team?
Well, it depends on what you mean by psych defense. He claimed he went into a blackout, which I suppose is a psych defense, not a very technical one.
Yeah.
He didn't bring in shrinks to saying it was psychomotor epilepsy or anything like that I recall. I don't recall that. But I do know that he said he went into a blackout.
Yeah, it's funny. He seems to remember so much vivid things about certain things and not so vivid things about this. What was your take on Pearson during the trial?
I think he had remorse for what he had done. Not enough, but some. And he was just, a pathetic figure.
Do you remember if there was any plea offer to Pearson to going to trial?
No, we didn't offer anything.
Nothing. I know that there was a list of witnesses on the prosecution side. Do you recall if there was a list of defense witnesses?
No, I don't.
No.
You asked about my reaction to him during the trial.
Yes.
One other reaction I had was that I felt he kind of just wanted to get it over with. At one point, during his cross-examination, I felt, okay, I'm going down. Let's just get this over with. And he kind of, let his facade drop somewhat. There was one point during the cross-examination when he kind of screwed up. He was describing how the chain of events when he was killing them, and there was a big illogical piece in his narration, and I think he kind of realized that and sort of gave up.
He forgot the lie.
Well, he jumped part of it, right? It had something to do, as I recall, with how the hammer got into his hand.
Yeah, we found that to be quite interesting, that all of a sudden Pauline, the wife, had it, and then he miraculously had it, and then swung and hit both women with one blow, kind of thing. It just seemed...
Yeah, that's exactly where he messed up.
Yeah. From your memories, do you think that was the actual story? He came home and saw the girls rolling marijuana and that he went into a rage? Or did you feel that this was premeditated and he did it, he waited for them all and just ambushed them one day? Maybe?
Well, of course, I don't know. I think it was I think he came home, found the older one rolling the joint, and went into a rage, killed her, and then realized that he had to kill the other two also if he was going to stay free. That's my guess.
When I was a kid, when I was little, I remember the detectives coming over and talking to my mom and dad, because we lived next door to them on Woodhams. I remember my dad telling the detectives that he recalled that in one golf game, Pearson was playing poorly, and he had went and started hitting a tree and breaking his clubs out of just this massive anger fit on the golf course. And I remember him relaying that information to the detectives. So he had definitely an anger streak about him.
I'm sure you're right.
He just sort of snapped. It didn't appear that the defense had really any witnesses, and from what we've read, it didn't appear that attorney or the defense had prepared well. Do you remember anything like that?
Was Christensen the attorney?
Yes.
He prepared well.
Okay.
He was a very ethical person and wouldn't put on a bunch of baloney and make up a bunch of stuff. But he was a very good lawyer, very well prepared, just too ethical to put in a bunch of garbage.
Well, that's refreshing.
It was refreshing.
Yeah. And I think probably because Pearson had, basically threw the towel in and didn't fight about it.
I don't think he threw the towel in, but kind of, wasn't vehement in his defense after a point. Resigned, I would say, was a more accurate term.
Do you recall who was your best witness?
Actually, I'd say Pearson himself was my best witness.
And why was that?
Because he broke down on cross-examination. It was just very obvious that he was guilty.
Is that unusual for someone in this position to testify?
No.
What was the biggest moment with him on cross-examination?
Well, I'd say the biggest moment was when he got confused about how he got the hammer. He gave inconsistent accounts of how that part of it happened.
When you addressed that, what did he do?
He kind of froze up and I think realized that he'd blown it.
Was that pretty much the answer everyone?
Well, I don't know. It's kind of the denouement of the story.
Up until that point, did he come off as cavalier or confident or just cocky or?
No, none of those. Just kind of pathetic.
Have you thought about this case over the years, or has it ever stuck in your mind about anything?
Yeah, I think about it a lot. I'm sad to say it in connection with trivial things. And I'll just tell you this for background, if that's all right with you.
Yes, please.
I think about it almost whenever I hear about a termite inspection. So I thought it was so outrageous that crawl space had been inspected by termite inspectors several times as the property changed hands. And on none of those occasions did the termite inspector, until the last one, notice that there were a bunch of bodies down there skeletons covered in plastic.
Right.
And it was very clear to me that the practice of termite inspectors, several of them, the practice was just to reach your hand around with a piece of chalk and put your mark there without actually doing any kind of inspection, because they certainly would have noticed the skeletons there. Another thing I think about, I know that Eichler homes were always built on a cement slab, and this one was a rare Eichler that had a crawl space under it. It was a different kind of Eichler.
Mm-hmm.
So that sticks out in my mind. And I think about how remarkable it was that little boy in the South recognized him from a wanted poster And you know what kind of serendipity that involved.
Yes.
And then also, I was really pleased that he didn't kill wife number 2 in Utah. That she was pretty lucky.
Yes.
So those are the things that I think about when I think about the case.
So that boy in Mississippi, that was really, that was just a stroke of genius, or just, like you said, serendipitous of the state of events. I obtained the autopsy report from the coroner. It's only a report with details. There's not any photos. I'm not sure I would be able to look at photos of my friends, but
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
no. My question is, I've seen pictures just online of the inside of the house from some realtor photos of the home selling many years ago. How far deep in were the bodies from the crawl space? Do you recall?
I can picture it from the photos. Not too far. They should have been seen by the termite inspectors, as I mentioned.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, because it said that, and according to Monte Macer, he said there was 2 crawl spaces, one accessed from the backyard, like a little door that kind of lifted up, and then there was also the crawl space that was accessible from one of the bedrooms. Do you remember anything like that?
No, I can't remember that detail. I do recall, though, that one of the tenants in the house reported smelling an odor consistent with rotting bodies under the house.
Do you remember who that person was?
No.
Oh.
But I do recall that there wasn't enough follow-up to locate the bodies at that point.
Okay. Because I had asked Mary Winget, when you helped Pearson and you saw all these red flags, did you talk or did you call the police? She said, no, my husband told me to mind my own business.
You know, along those lines, I thought it was a little bit odd that when he was asked, where did the family go while he was packing up to leave, he said that his wife had inherited a slaughterhouse and that they had gone back to take over the slaughterhouse wherever it was supposed to be. And I thought that was kind of a strange reason for him to come up with, for them to move out.
I know. I read that also. The irony of it, I guess.
He was obviously a pretty sick man.
Yeah. I've also spoken with Arlene Roosh's daughter, and she's filled in some gaps of what happened in Utah. And her mom was a single mom. Because I asked her, what do you think the appeal was for her to connect with Pearson? By then, he was Albert 4. And it was kind of interesting because she was referring to him as Al, and that it just sort of was out of the context of how I knew him. And she said that when she first met him, the mom had asked, so, he's a nice man. What do you think? And the daughter I spoke with, she said, he's evil, Mom. There's something about him I just don't like. He's evil, and I don't want you to be involved with this guy. And it turns out the woman, Arlene, she ended up marrying him. But he didn't engage with her kids. She had 5 kids. He was able to just blend in and prey upon people who, like her, a single mom who probably needed a sense of security. And what he had done to them, although it wasn't murder, it was, awful things that he had done, ended up not paying the rent on the home that they rented. So this big air that he put on of being wealthy and having lots of money and doing well in his job, he just was reinventing to every place that he ended up moving to. She also stated that when the baby was born, he was very hands-off, didn't want anything to do with this, the baby crying, the baby needed to be fed. There was just no hands-on. And when the baby did cry, he would get visibly upset and agitated. And she hadn't found him to be any kind of, no empathy and very stoic and unfriendly. And he was only out there for about 2 years.
That's when he had departed, because he moved out there in 69, met her in December of 69, and then the baby was born in 71. And then he took off with the baby in December of 71. So he, and then it's interesting too, is the newspaper stated that he was taking the baby on a business trip. And she said that wasn't true. She doesn't even know where that came from. But he said, I want to get better acquainted with my son, and I'm just going to take him for a short drive. And then he never came back. And that caused the family just to have to move in with other families from their church. And the mom had a breakdown, of course. And just, the mom was never the same, always looking for the son. And that's been the burning question of all of the people I've spoke with, like Mary Winjet and Monte Macer. I said, whatever you find out, just see what you can find out about the boy. So I did find out that, well, he wasn't reunited with his natural mother until he was in his 20s. In fact, he didn't even know about any of it, until his late 20s, early 30s, when family convinced Pearson to please tell them if the baby was alive or dead. They were writing to him in prison, and he had finally said, well, he's living in Arizona and this is his name. And then she was able to reunite with him. George, I truly respect your time. I do want to tell you one quick thing, because this is something that has kind of stuck with me all my life. Things that really gets my memory of Mary Ann, because that was the daughter that I was closest to, is that Boston song, More Than a Feeling, that's been something that's always stuck in my mind. And when I was little, she was very artistic, so she taught me how to draw, was showing me how to draw stars, and every time I draw a star, I think of Mary Ann. So
that's nice. Good.
And that, yeah. And so,
was she a nice young woman?
Oh, she was great. She would take my brother and I to the pool, to Mary Gomez pool in Santa Clara. She'd come over and go with us to the beach and help my mom with things, because I was 8 and she was around 12 at the time, but she spent a lot of time with us, and she was very lovely, very polite, just a genuine fine young lady. And I will always just refer to her as a little bright ray of sunshine, and someone that I've always remembered, even after all these years. Thank you so much, George. I truly appreciate your time, and I'll send you an email with some information, and I appreciate all of your input as well.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, Mark, that was an incredible interview. I feel really honored to have talked to George. As I said before, he's a man of few words, but once we got going about the case, I knew that he was feeling comfortable and really gave us some amazing information, some true value there based on his face-to-face with Pearson in the courtroom.
Yeah, great interview, Sonya.
So as promised, I want to bring you the interview I had with retired Detective Sergeant Monte Rex Macer. He's a lovely person. I really enjoy my talks with him. He has been amazing and so helpful in so many ways. So without any further ado, what do you think, Mark?
Sounds good, because it is an interesting interview and it kind of stands for itself.
I'm here today with Monte Macer. He was one of the follow-up detectives on the Pearson case in the mid-70s.
Right.
So thank you, Monte, for being here on the show today.
Okay.
Thank you for your service. And tell us a little bit about how you were involved in the James Arthur Pearson case.
Okay. At the time, I was working in the Detective Bureau at Santa Clara Police Department. And the primary investigators on this case was Detective Don Sessions and Wayne Britt. And they did the preliminary investigation. And then they were both promoted within the department. And so I inherited the case. And it was my job to freshen it and keep in contact with the various witnesses in it in case we ever were successful in apprehending Mr. Pearson. As you know, he became a fugitive and was gone for quite some time.
Right. How long were you in law enforcement?
35 and a half years. I joined the police department in January 1959, and I retired in June of 1994. So 35 and a half years. And I spent 30 years of that in investigation.
With the Santa Clara Police
Santa Clara Police Department, yeah.
How did you like that kind of work?
That's why I stayed there.
Yeah.
It killed my opportunity for promotion because they wanted you at that time to move around to different divisions, like go to patrol, go to personnel, go to internal investigation. But I just stayed in criminal investigation because I liked it. He became a fugitive. The leads ran out in Cedar City, Utah, where he fled. And he established a new identity there. And he had married a woman in Cedar City, Utah, and they had a child. And he left and went to Biloxi, Mississippi. And of course, at that time, we didn't know that he'd fled to Biloxi, Mississippi, but he arrived there around Christmas time with his little boy, and he checked into a motel there.
And what year was that?
It was about 1971, because I think the little boy was around 11 months old or something like that.
Yeah.
He wasn't quite a year old, I don't think. But he checked in the motel there, and the motel owner was suspicious because here this man was coming around at Christmas time with this small child, and he thought it was very suspicious. And then at housekeeping was cleaning a room, and she found some identification hidden in the room under the name of Four. So she brought it to the manager's attention.
Oh, wow.
And he called the local office of the FBI. But I don't know, he may have called the local police department. I'm not sure who he called, but at any rate, the person he called supposedly made some inquiries and came back and told him that there was nothing suspicious or unusual about the individual.
I see.
But if the FBI would have followed up and contacted the authorities in Cedar City, Utah, and asked them about Mr. Four, they would have known right away that he was a fugitive, but that didn't happen.
Oh, yeah. And do you think that's just from limited resources or just lack of communication or follow-up?
Well, it depends. If it was a local police department, it might have been a lack of resources, and then maybe a lack of initiative to follow up on it. And the same thing would be true with the FBI. If the agent just didn't feel like doing a follow-up investigation, it just died with him. So then some years passed, and the FBI came out with some wanted flyers. And I think you have one. Yeah, they were circulated around the whole United States. And one of them ended up in Cedar City, Utah. And the original motel owner there saw that wanted poster. And he said, geez, that looks like Mr. Four that checked into my hotel years ago.
So that would have been 1978?
Probably, yeah.
Where he had already met another woman. And as you know, he resembled Henry Kissinger. So,
right.
So that was kind of a face that was familiar to people.
Right.
And
Exactly.
then, of course, the FBI went over there.
The FBI, Agent O'Neill was the agent, and he and his partner went over to the shoe store, and they asked if, I forget his new identity, but they asked if he was working there, and the guy said, yeah, he's right out there on the floor. So O'Neill said, well, he'd like to speak with him, So he and his partner were looking at him, and of course they were saying, well, gee, it looks like him. What do you think? What do you think? Is that him? Anyway, Pearson went back and met him, and O'Neill confronted him and said, we have this wanted poster, and you resemble a person on this wanted poster. Is this you? And at first, he denied it. Said, no, that's not me. And O'Neill said, well, fine, we can go down to the office, we can take your fingerprints, we can clear this up. At that time, Pearson said, yeah, that's me.
Wow.
So he admitted that he was James Arthur Pearson.
Wow. So, of course, then they apprehended him and...
They took him down to their office. They Mirandized him, and he gave them a full confession.
And then, is that when you got involved? Then?
Well, I was involved probably a few years before that, because I was assigned as the case agent at that time, the case detective, to keep track of witnesses and things like that in case at a later date he was arrested. I inherited the case to keep it up to date.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And that's where you had been in touch with the witnesses that had known him?
Right. We kept in contact with the wife worked at Kitty World, and the one daughter, youngest daughter, went to school at Cupertino. Mm-hmm. The other witnesses, neighbors and things like that, we kept in contact with.
Okay.
And family members,
So the family members, would that have been Pauline's brother from Pennsylvania?
That was relative had called the police department on a prior occasion, and they were concerned because they had lost contact with their relative. Okay. Pauline, we sent an officer out to the home, I think it was Frank Vasquez, who ended up being a chief of police there in Santa Clara. But anyway, he went out to do a welfare check and contacted the neighbors, and he was told that the Pearsons had moved out, and that Mr. Pearson had said that his wife had come into an inheritance and she left and had gone back east to join her family there. Some of the neighbors, I think, went into the house. He had left a lot of personal items around the house there.
Correct.
And some of the neighbors were concerned because there were things left there that a female would never leave, like cosmetics and other personal items. Right. But at any rate, the house was cleared out. And the police department didn't get involved anymore at that time because they assumed or thought that, the wife had moved out, the family had moved out, and there was nothing wrong.
Okay. So when Officer Frank Vasquez went over there, that was still probably in 1969?
Pauline's family was concerned that they'd lost contact with her. So Vasquez reported back that, he was told by neighbors that they'd moved out and gone back east or somewhere because she'd come into some money.
Right.
Inheritance.
So by this time, a few years had passed, and
right.
And then what happened?
Well, meanwhile, in Cedar City, when he left and took off and went to Biloxi, Mississippi, his wife there in Cedar City didn't hear from him. And of course, he never came back.
After he took off with the boy.
He took off with the boy.
Yeah.
And he took off and left. So she belonged to the Mormon church, I think, there in Cedar City. And so she sent out some of the Mormon temples around the country. And some of those flyers or the information made it up to Pendleton, Oregon, where Pearson was originally from. And somebody up there in Pendleton, Oregon recognized his picture. I think they sent a picture up there or something, but recognized him as James Arthur Pearson. And the wife in Cedar City came into that information.
So that was luck. That was
right.
Surely luck,
yeah.
and good sleuthing on her part to connect with, trying to get
right.
feelers out based on the church.
Right.
Wow.
So then, when his true name became known, then we got back into the investigation. We were notified by Cedar City, Utah, that the person, James Arthur Pearson, we wanted, had been in Cedar City and had left. Whereabouts unknown.
How did you all connect? How did police stations, or how did Pendleton, Oregon police communicate with Santa Clara back then? Was it phone calls or?
Probably phone calls, yeah, but mostly by telephone.
Yeah.
Probably.
And then to relay photos, would you just have to mail them to
They'd be mailed, or you could go down to the newspaper and you could have them sent. That they had a way of sending pictures from one newspaper to another, so you could do that. But usually, probably just by mailing.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have the computer system at that time. I think they sent some pictures from one newspaper to another, is my recollection.
Yeah.
So then our investigators got involved, and I think it was probably Britt and Don Sessions. Then they got in touch with Cedar City, Utah. I don't know if they ever went back there or if they just did everything on the phone. I know they continued investigating it and did the follow-up investigation with the wife there in Cedar City.
And at that time, he was getting into a lot of trouble on his own there, starting with the Utah Cattle and Steer Company and different things like that, and claiming to the investors that he would be the banker, and then them finding out that he had stolen over $50,000 worth of.
That's right, yeah. So. And he more or less, when he was here, I think he got in trouble he was selling vacuum cleaners or something. And I think he got in trouble here also with the possible theft situation.
Yeah, he was working for the Santa Clara Credit Bureau, and he had embezzled some money there, or they had called it misappropriation of funds.
And I think he got a job with, selling vacuum cleaners, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that was one of his first jobs when he got to Utah.
And I think he had the same trouble there.
Yeah.
He seemed to have a problem with misappropriating funds.
He was a financial hot mess.
Right, yeah.
Do you think that based on the things that were going on in Utah, that he may have caught with that the authorities were onto him, and that's when he just took off?
I'm probably, yeah. That's probably what happened.
Okay.
Well, he fled, and I think he had a Cadillac or something, I think, in Cedar City. So, of course, they would have put out a all-points bulletin, be on the lookout for him, driving that car and all that sort of thing. And then the FBI came out with their unlawful flight and then put out their flyers,
Let's fast forward for just a minute. What was your reaction on when you heard that this guy was identified or found in Biloxi?
Well, of course, we were elated. I mean, yeah. We were elated, That's when Lieutenant Harry Burns and myself, we went down to Biloxi to pick him up.
And tell me how that all went.
Well, we were just notified, that he was in custody in Biloxi, Mississippi. The FBI had picked him up. And so, of course, we made arrangements to fly down there because he was going to be extradited back to California and be prosecuted for the murder of his wife and 2 children.
Which he ultimately just confessed to when they picked him.
He made a full confession to the FBI.
And when you go to pick him up, he obviously was in a cell at the jail there.
Well, he was in the local jail there in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Did he talk to you?
No.
At all? Oh.
He didn't want to talk to us. He exercised his right to an attorney.
Did he have an attorney at that time?
I forget, but something must have happened between the time that he confessed to the FBI and the time we got down there, because he didn't want to talk to us.
And it was you and Harry Burns.
Yeah. Yeah. And Burns is deceased now. Yeah, he passed away.
Yeah. He probably got an attorney, told him to be quiet or something.
Probably either that or some jailhouse lawyer told him, hey, man, shut up. Don't say anything to the cops, Don't incriminate yourself.
Anymore.
Right,
Anymore
exactly,
than you could have possibly done.
We flew down there and picked him up.
So you go out there, you arrive at the jail, you pick him up, and you fly back.
We talked to Agent O'Neill down there and, got that lowdown on his confession. And then we talked to some of the other authorities there, the local authorities, the sheriff's department, about his living there in Biloxi and the fact that he'd remarried Jackie something.
Watson.
That's it, yeah. Because his assumed name was Watson, that's right.
Right.
He married Jackie, and she'd adopted him, I think, the little boy. So she thought of herself as a real mother. And then he had told Jackie that his prior wife back in Cedar City was unfit. I forget, it was a drinking problem or mental problems, but anyway, she was, in his opinion, she was unfit to be a mother. So I think he told her that's why he took off. I'm not sure. She thought of herself as the mother
Right.
of the child.
Because she, at the time, I mean, he was nearly a year when Jackie met the boy.
Right.
So, I mean, that's an embracing feeling,
Right.
you know. And she had children from, I think, a previous
Prior marriage.
And then they continued to build their family with no more natural kids, but they had
A blended family.
A blended family and being foster parents or something.
We tried to get the local authorities to take the little boy into custody because the natural mother in Cedar City wanted to get her son back.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God.
And so we tried to get the local authorities and the FBI to do something. We had no jurisdiction. We only had jurisdiction over the murder, but we didn't have any jurisdiction over child abduction.
Right, because that wasn't your case.
That wasn't our case. It would have been Cedar City, Utah, or the feds, the federal government, the FBI could have gotten involved for interstate transportation of kidnapping or abduction.
Right. Gosh.
And we couldn't get the local authorities were reluctant to take the little boy into custody.
So he just remained there in Mississippi.
Well, no, she took off with him.
Oh, Jackie.
That's my understanding. She left Mississippi with the little boy.
Oh.
And went somewhere in the East Coast. I want to say New York, but I'm not sure.
What a tangled web, huh?
Yeah. But to my knowledge, she bought the story that the mother in Utah was unfit, and now she thought of herself as a real mother.
I see.
So to my knowledge, I think she took off and went to New York, but I'm not positive.
Okay. So he comes back to California, and then what happens?
Well, of course, we prosecuted him for the murders, and we went to trial. He pled not guilty. George Kennedy was a trial attorney for the DA's office. He wasn't a district attorney at that time.
Okay.
He was a trial deputy. And he tried the case. And he took the witness stand.
What happened there?
He more or less confessed on the witness stand. Or not more or less. He did confess on the witness stand. And his story was that he saw Paula with some marijuana, and they argued. And he ended up choking her out and killed her. So then he said he thought about it. What was he going to do? And his wife then came home from work, and they got in an argument. She saw Paula, and she, of course, got hysterical.
Yeah.
And they got in a confrontation. And somehow a hammer just happened to materialize in his hand. He didn't know how it happened. And he said it was like a meat tenderizing hammer, my recollection.
Yeah.
And he beat her with the hammer and killed her.
Yeah.
Now, his story, I think, originally was that Paula and Marianne came home together around noontime. But on a follow-up investigation, I think I found out that Marianne was still in school around noontime, and she wouldn't have gotten out of school until around 2 or 2:30. We figured that he had some time between the time his wife came home and the time his youngest daughter came home.
Sure.
Marianne showed up, and then he beat her with the hammer, killed her. And I think the interesting thing there is that he said on the stand that from the time he killed his wife until Marianne came home, he sat and thought, what should I do? Should I commit suicide, or should I just leave? What should I do? But there's some time gap there by his own admission. on the stand.
I mean, it's the whole thing, of course, is so senseless, you know.
Right.
Do you think he was trying to portray himself as like temporary insanity, that he just didn't remember what happened, and then there's...
Well, he had total recollection.
Oh, okay. So...
No, he didn't. He wasn't fainting. He didn't remember. I mean, he...
Oh. But I mean, to all of a sudden this meat cleaver...
Well, that was the thing, that the meat tenderizing the hamper suddenly materialized in his hand. He didn't know how it got there, you know.
Yeah.
That was the only thing he really didn't know about.
And from your recollection, do you remember, was this a long trial?
I think it was around 2 or 3 weeks. It didn't last months.
Yeah.
You know,
Not like
like today, where they would have stretched it out, you know.
And he confessed. Is it unusual for someone like that to get onto the witness stand?
Yeah.
Why do you think he did that?
I think to show maybe some mitigating circumstances as far as, you know, his intent. But it looked like, from sitting there listening to him, like his intent was to cover up what he had done by getting rid of the witnesses, you know.
Right.
He killed his oldest daughter, and then he waited until his wife came home, and then he killed her.
Right.
And then he waited till his youngest daughter got home, and then he killed her. So it looked like there was a lot, in my mind, it looked like there was a lot of premeditation.
Yeah. Do you think it was a crime of passion, like he says, or do you think he calculated this whole... Do you think that was a real story?
I think originally, you know, it was a hate of passion. I mean, where he got in the argument with Paula and choked her out. But then after that, I mean, then it got into, I think, you know, he planned or thought about what his options were going to be. And he figured his best option would be to kill his wife and his younger daughter.
Yeah.
And leave, and, you know.
A couple people I spoke with seemed to think that because he was such a financial hot mess, and he seemed to get fired from every single job that he had because we found evidence of that, that maybe just the whole thing with finances, maybe he planned the whole thing all along, and this story that he told on the stand was just some sympathy ruse or something. I mean,
Well, I forget how this information came out, but I think his wife had more or less discussed his situation and more or less accused him of being a bum or being unable to take care of the family, and that, you know, that they'd had some discussions about that, about his inability to maintain a job or to take care of the family.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that, that played into it probably, you know, in his mind,
Right.
more or less being a failure,
Yeah.
and his family aware of it, you know. And I forget how that information came out, if Pauline had talked to people at work or, you know, how we got a hold of that information. But I think there are things in a report about more or less them having a troubled relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I did locate. Do you know who Kathy Calvert with the Mercury
Yeah.
News?
Oh, yeah, I talked to her a lot.
Yeah. Well, she had written, and do you know who Kermit Jadaker is?
Pardon?
Kermit Jadaker. He's a writer and a novel fiction
Okay.
and a newspaper writer. But he and her put together an article that was called The House of Horrors, and that was published on October 6, 1974. It was just months after the discovery on Claremont. And so the thing that they had put in there, which was a really key piece of information I found interesting, was that Pauline's mother had come for the summer. So Pearson had his mother-in-law come out to spend time that summer of 69, and in hopes to woo her and charm her to get him to appoint him as her power of attorney for her home and property in Pennsylvania. But toward the end of the summer, like the end of August, beginning of September, when he learned the mother-in-law gave the power of attorney to her son, he packed her up, put her in the car, and drove her to San Francisco airport and just dropped her off. No money for travel, nothing. Basically told her,
You're on your own.
You're on your own, and you are going to have to, you figure out how you're going to, your Pennsylvania family, to And back then, I mean, to wire someone money, it could take hours or even a day.
Right.
So that poor lady who was already suffering from onset signs of dementia was left there. I mean, what a jackass.
Well, that shows you
Yeah.
the character.
Pauline had 12 other brothers and sisters. She was, I think, the youngest of 13.
Okay.
Her mother was from Czechoslovakia, you know, very heavy in their Slavic community,
Right.
and very, very, very Catholic, and was very dedicated to her faith.
Right.
And so he brings her out, and I think she got a first hand of the family dynamic. And I think she probably saw that he wasn't working and had opinions about it. But when he had learned that she had already assigned her
Power of attorney.
to Pauline's brother, John, she did travel back, but, you know, I'm sure they had to Western Union.
Right.
But
Her kids, probably.
Yes, her son. And so when I had made contact with his son, which would have been the girl's cousins, he didn't remember a whole lot at first. And I said, well, just keep my number and call me if you remember. That was a couple Fridays ago. Well, they called me that Monday. I said, oh my God, I'm so happy you called me.
Right.
You know, but she as I was telling them just little bits and pieces, he started remembering things.
Yeah.
And he had been discharged from the service in the summer of 69, because he said that, and it was between that time that he remembers when his dad had to arrange funds to bring the mom
Bring her
back.
back.
Yeah. So, I mean, just as we're talking, he's saying, wait a minute, that does sound familiar. But so tell me a bit about what else happened at the trial. I know that you testified.
I think I did, yeah.
But
I know Harry Burns testified.
But you also were instrumental in kind of fast forward to writing letters to the parole board.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
Well, really, when he applied for parole, of course, I was very upset that he was being even considered for parole, because I had some real strong feelings about he should have spent the rest of his life in prison.
Right.
And so I wrote a letter saying that I didn't think he was a candidate for parole, because for one thing, the way he left Cedar City, Utah, and went to Biloxi, and then deprived the birth mother in Cedar City access to her son. That really upset me for some reason.
Yeah.
I just didn't think that was right, and that a mother in Cedar City should have been able to make contact with her son.
Yeah, no, as a parent, it's unsettling.
Right.
It's quite unsettling.
And I had some very negative feelings about Jackie, and the fact that she concealed or took off with the kid.
So she wasn't at the trial?
To my knowledge, she wasn't. I might be wrong. I think she came to visit him in the county jail, but I don't think she showed up at the trial. But I'm not positive.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have an article about the second wife in Utah, Arlene Roosh, that she had to stick just to the questions. She couldn't say that things that she had found out or anything like that. And, and obviously because they're focusing on the one thing. And
well, they probably didn't want to show prejudice.
Yeah.
The fact that he was a complete, moron or whatever, for lack of a word, I can't. Yeah, I wrote letters to the parole board, and I said that I didn't think that he should be paroled for a variety of reasons, because of the nature of the crime, killing his wife and 2 children, and also the fact that he had concealed his son from the birth mother, which in my mind just showed a lack of respect to the birth mother.
I didn't see any actual letters attached to as any sort of evidence or exhibits.
Okay, the letters that I wrote, the letter, would be in our original police file.
Oh.
The letter that George Kennedy wrote would be in the DA's file. They wouldn't have gone to the court.
Okay. So they wouldn't be included.
It'd be interesting, too, if you contact the son to see what he's been told about his father, if he had any contact with him in prison.
I know. And I have a phone number, and I've had the phone number for 2 weeks. I just out of all the phone calls I've made, this is the one that I'm just a little apprehensive. The worst thing he could say is, I don't want to talk.
I want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Have you tried to do any background on the son?
My criminologist came up with him living in Mesa and gave me a phone number. And it's sitting there right on my desk. And every day I'm like, do I call?
Yeah. How about his mother? Did your...
That one, it's strange because we came up with a Jacqueline Nichols, and those names are spelled differently. And it's very vague where she ended up. I have an address in New York. I have an address in Arizona.
Originally my recollection is she went to New York.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened after.
Right.
After that.
Right. And a couple of them, the birth dates seem to coincide with what we know. So.
See, I retired in June of '94. So then if he would have applied for parole after that time, of course, I wouldn't have been made aware of it unless the police department called me. They never did. About a follow-up letter of that or information. The normal protocol would be the parole board would contact the law enforcement agency that he was convicted from and also the DA's office to notify him that, hey, he's coming up for parole again. Do you have any opinions about it? So there very well could be other letters in that file.
Yeah, and hopefully that's what the CDCR will be giving to
They should have that.
Yeah, so that's what I'm...
Yeah.
This would make a good movie.
That would be interesting.
I know. I think it... that's why I want to cover as much as I can so that, if anyone does want to ever explore that. I just feel that Marianne and her sister and mom didn't have any say in what happened to them and didn't get to tell their side, and I'm gonna...
No, that's good. And that needs to be done,
Yeah. I found George Kennedy and I called him at...
Oh, good.
And when I want to find something...
What did he say?
So he answered, and I said, hi, may I please, is this George Kennedy? He said, yes. And I said, is this the same George Kennedy that was the DA for Santa Clara County? And he paused. He goes,
yes.
Yes. What's this about? And I said, I'm on the phone going. I go, my name is Sonya Paz from Santa Clara, and I'm doing just like what I had to do with you. I'm doing an investigative story about neighbors of mine who were killed in 1969, and you were the DA on the case. And he goes, which case was it? And I said, James Arthur Pearson. He goes, same thing that you said. He goes, oh, the guy who killed the wife and 2 daughters. I go, yes. He goes, and if you're going to be telling a story, that's a good one. So we agreed that I would call him probably, like around the 27th or
good,
so.
Great.
So I have that in my calendar. So
good. No, George, he'll be a good resource. He should remember that.
And thank you so much. Lovely to meet you as well.
You too.
Anything else?
If you need anything, let me know.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't do a lot of the initial investigation. I just did the follow-up to keep it fresh, to keep the witnesses fresh in case we needed them for court at a later date.
I see. Thank you, Rex, so much for taking time to speak with me today. I really appreciate your time and inviting me over to talk to you about this case.
You're welcome.
That was so awesome. And again, many thanks to him for his amazing service and for his impeccable memory as well.
Yeah, great interview, Sonya.
All right. So this is it. This is a wrap for today. Where we go from here, Mark?
We're going to be going to discussion of Monte Macer's interview with you a little bit in episode 7, along with some other law enforcement interviews that you've conducted. So I guess we'll see you next time on Investigated.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to follow Investigated on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also visit our website at investigatedpod.com to learn more about your hosts, Sonya Paz and Marek Kaspchik. Follow us on social media and connect with us. Investigated is written, edited, and hosted by me, Sonya Paz, with story input and advisement from Marek Kospchik. And many thanks to the research of criminologist Clark Williams and to Allison Betts Goldman for her contributions to this story. If you'd like to support our show, visit our website. And if you'd like to give us a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, we would always appreciate that because extra podcast love is amazing. It also helps us get more visibility from fabulous listeners like you. Thanks again, and see you next time.